Welcome back. All right, this is a topic we talked about a little less than a month ago, but I'm coming at it from a bit of a different angle. And yes, I'm using magnets from other leagues because why not? So, when we talk about expansion, obviously most people will say, nope, the NHL's at 32 teams, that's fine. The NHL likely looks at it and says 32 teams is great. There's more money to be made with expansion, though. And it's interesting because whenever I talk about expansion and I throw magnets up on a board and talk about certain cities, immediately people will mention other cities. Well, what about? And I don't think those people are necessarily wrong, but there are certain things that the NHL needs in order to really look at a community. And in order for the NHL to be in that community, they need those things in place. So, one thing is that when asked about what the expansion fee would be next time out, Bettman didn't say no. Bettman said a lot. He pointed out that the Ottawa Senators sold for $950 million. So the rumors have been that it'll probably be $1 billion next time out for an expansion fee, and I think that's true. And I do think that would scare off some of the wannabe suitors for the National Hockey League. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money you're spending up front. And this is why when we talk about how they're good teams right out of the gate and how fair that is or isn't, I think that's part and parcel of it. I think if you're going to spend $500 million, $650 million to get a team, I don't think it's unreasonable to say you want a team that's at least decent out of the gate. I'm not talking about cup winners, but, good team out of the gate. So when it comes to what it's going to take, Bettman says they're not in expansion mode right now. And he keeps saying not right now. So if in any other situation you ask somebody a question and they don't say no, the answer's not necessarily no. It might be they're trying not to hurt your feelings, but in this case, why wouldn't Bettman just say no? Why wouldn't Bettman be saying 32 teams is perfect, we will not expand? That's not what's being said here at all. So what he said as well, and Elliot Friedman reporting this is, he said, okay, we have a building, this is our market, this is our ownership group, we'd really like to go. That's what would get the NHL to take a look at it. Right now, he admits he's been having meetings. Kevin Weeks reporting all of these places on the board as being teams or cities that have had interest. So Houston, we know Houston. Houston's absolutely, that could work. It's a big metro area that can work. Salt Lake City, Utah can work absolutely as well. It's not as big of a market as some others, but doesn't matter. It absolutely can work for hockey. Quebec City, it's a small market, but again, Quebec City, a lot of interest there. They do have an NHL level building. Atlanta, of course, South Forsyth coming in with a new building and dreams of coming back into the NHL. Portland is out there as well. The thing with Portland, I do wonder if they're going to find somebody with $1 billion that they're willing to burn and take that risk of joining the National Hockey League. San Diego expressing some interest. I don't know if the NHL would have a fourth team in California. I don't know that's something they would look at, but can it work? Yes. And would I immediately be a San Diego fan? Well, the San Diego Padres are my favorite baseball team. The Chargers, my favorite football team. Yes, they're in LA now, but my fandom traveled with them. And then Toronto's on the board because there's always that talk of a second team in the city of Toronto. And as crazy as that sounds, can it make money? Yeah. A second team in Toronto would still make money. The question then would become, where would they play? And how would that work? Would they share the same building as the Maple Leafs? Would they need another building? Where do you put that build? And then, of course, you have all of the other discussions as well, right? But I do think there's enough people and enough interest. And that's really what you're looking at. You're looking for a place where you've got the interest, where you've got the building, where you've got the corporate sponsorship, the corporate money. And that is something that has hurt small market teams in the past. I think it still hurts some teams that may not have the corporate money that other teams do. And, when you have those big private boxes and they're rented out all year to a big corporation, that can be a huge difference in your bottom line. So when we look at it from this perspective, obviously, if there's going to be an expansion, the question then becomes a matter of when. So 2017 Vegas comes in, 2021 Seattle comes in. I still think 2030 makes some sense. You're giving yourself a lot of years between that last expansion and when you're going to start again. And then I think, and again, this is just me personally looking at it, I think 2 at a time makes more sense if you're going to expand by 4. If you're only going to expand by one or two teams, it gets tricky. One team means you're going to have lopsided divisions. You have 33 teams in the league. There's no way to make that even. 34 teams, you're going to have much the same argument. You're going to have, and I saw the last time I did a video on this, people saying, well, why couldn't they just do 6 divisions of 6? They absolutely can. I don't know if the NHL would want to do that, but they could. And then the question becomes one of, well, would the playoffs expand? Bettman is still not a proponent of expanding the playoffs. I'm okay with that, personally. I understand the frustration. The idea that there's more teams means there's less of a chance of teams that are, in the doldrums right now necessarily shaking that off and winning themselves a championship. But if you're going to build the best team, you're going to build the best team. It doesn't matter how many teams are in the league. So let's say 2030 they come in. Odds are it'll still be the same rules, right? So teams can protect 8 skaters and a goalie, or 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and a goalie. And so it's going to be up to the team as to who they're going to protect and all that. And then we can have the argument over, which teams have protected the wrong players. We see that in every expansion draft, where a GM will protect players and we say to ourselves, well, that seems kind of messy, doesn't it? Why are they letting that guy go in order to protect that veteran? And that seems to be where things normally fall, is that GMs will protect veterans that they probably should be more willing to let go in exchange for losing younger players who may have their best days ahead of them. But expansion protected lists and all of that aside, we're looking at a league that very quickly expanded by 2 teams. So it was 4 years between Vegas and Seattle coming in. It was not 4 years between the awarding of the franchises. So June 24th of 2015, the expansion process starts. And Bettman's there, Bill Daly's there to say, yep, we're going to expand, right? It was June 22nd of 2016 that Vegas is awarded an expansion team. Now, Quebec was in the running right up until the last moment. They pulled the bid, and the NHL basically said, yeah, you're going to have to shelve that. And there were some concerns about the Quebec bid that made it a less attractive bid than the Vegas one. December 4th of 2018, Seattle was awarded an expansion team. So their expansion team is awarded well before Seattle comes into the National Hockey League. My guess is we won't hear anything about the expansion process starting until roughly a year before that award is given, and 2 years before that team comes in. So if you follow that same guideline the next time around, that would mean 2028. So we would still be 5 years away from the NHL saying, okay, we are considering an expansion. So it's not on the horizon, but I do think that it's going to happen. I think that Bettman knows what he's doing and putting that out there and saying it's going to be a lot of money for that expansion fee. I think that he is well aware that that might drive other cities to make a bid. I'm wearing Kansas City Scouts because Kansas City's got a building. I don't think they have an owner that's looking to spend $1 billion to bring a team to Kansas City. But the interest has been there in the past, could be there again in the future. Yes, Milwaukee and all those other areas could work. I think that honestly, and I'd be rooting for Portland if Portland really truly gets into this process. Because for me, again, you go down the coast, you've got Vancouver, Seattle, Portland. It would be great to have a team in Portland for Vancouver. It's a natural rival right there. I think that would be fantastic. But I think San Diego can work. You could have almost a California division at that point. You could have the 4 California teams if you had San Diego. And then Vegas and Arizona could be your 6 teams. And Arizona might be part of the reason why we haven't heard anything definitive when it comes to expansion. So you're looking for a team in your city, any of these cities. The Coyotes, the uncertainty around the Coyotes, which should be cleared up in January, is going to prevent the NHL from necessarily saying we're going to go into an expansion process. I really think that while Arizona has various options in the Phoenix area, and they will likely have themselves a plan in January, here's where our buildings are going, here's what we're going to do. Until then, the NHL kind of hands off, leave it be. And so after that process is done and after the Coyotes have said, all right, here's where our building's going to go, here's when it's going to open, and they've got that excitement and they've got that squared away, the NHL will then say, okay, we're going to stay in Arizona. I'm going to stay in Phoenix, Mesa, wherever that building ends up being built, right? And so we're going to stay here. The Arizona Coyotes aren't going anywhere. And then You could start, again, the preliminary looking around. Like Bettman admitting that he has had, meetings with people from interested cities. Why would you do that if you're not going to expand? Why would you do that? You wouldn't. Your answer would be we're not open for business. They clearly are. And again, you want to lock down the Coyotes first, make sure you've got that straightened out, and then you can look at expanding. It is important to make sure you have 32 healthy franchises. And when we look back, say 10 years, we were looking at Carolina as not necessarily being all that healthy. Are they going to stay there? Well, now there's no concern for that. Florida, there was a lot of concern. It feels like the last couple of years that straightened out because it's insane. It's like you get competent management and suddenly the fans show up. But for the Coyotes, I think that's been a similar story where the ownership has been always in flux. Whoever's in charge seems to be changing all the time. It feels like some of that has settled down, and you've got an owner with deep pockets. You've got a team there that is making the right moves, that they should be getting better, and so what's left is the building. So once that's done, then I think the NHL continues this. Circling back. Salt Lake City, right? Again, coming back to Salt Lake City. Very vocal on they want the Coyotes. So in the case that the Coyotes can't make it work in Arizona, they are very likely headed for the state of Utah. And that would work because they're already in the Central Division, right? There was speculation when Arizona was moved to the Central. First off, it appeared at the time that maybe Vegas kind of strong-armed said, we're not leaving the Pacific. And so it was easier to move Arizona. But there was always that speculation, too, of if you're going to move the team to Houston, if you're going to move the team somewhere else, and in this case, as I've said, Salt Lake City, Utah, then it makes sense to have them in the Central Division because then you don't have to mess around the divisions again if that team gets moved. But that's the only one that seems to be in any kind of peril, right? So we've talked before about how the league needs to get its house in order, and I think it pretty much has. Again, I do expect the Coyotes situation to resolve itself where they get that building. And then we start talking about this. But keep in mind, 2030 is a long ways off. It is a long ways off. It may not feel like that at times, but that's a long ways off. And there's a lot of time between now and then for teams to continue to build themselves up. And when I hear people say, well, you're going to water down the product, it's the same thing people have said since the early 80s. I remember the complaints in the early 80s about how the WHA expansion had watered down the league. That's why there was so much scoring. There were all these players in the league that didn't belong there. And then the league expanded to 30 teams. About a decade later, they started the process of expanding to 30 teams. So the NHL's not worried about watering down the product. And I don't think they really necessarily have to worry. Because, how often do we talk in news videos? How often do we talk about teams and about how there's players in the AHL that just can't get that break in the National Hockey League, but they're good enough? And that certainly happens. It happens with goaltenders where they get stuck at the AHL level. So, yes, I do think that if the NHL expanded in about a decade, I think that they should be able to, make it work. And we shouldn't see a huge drop in terms of the quality of player at the National Hockey League level. And usually we'll see more European players coming in. Columbus was creative when they joined the NHL. They picked up a couple of European players who ended up being pretty good. So it really is a matter of doing the proper scouting and bringing in the right players, and you don't necessarily see a huge drop-off in terms of the quality of the player at the National Hockey League level. And for the NHLPA, they'd be all over this because you're adding almost an extra 100 jobs. You're adding about 100 guys to your union, and so it strengthens the union. It adds more money to the coffers, and from a National Hockey League perspective, as I've said before, expansion fees are not shared with the union. So if they get $1 billion each, if they pick up $4 billion in expansion fees from any of these cities on the board, or sure, Milwaukee, wherever else, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be shared between, you have to think 32 owners would share that. Yeah, $4 billion divided by 32 is a lot of money. That's, I checked it. I checked the math. It's still a lot of money. So you're asking owners, would you like to get this many extra millions of dollars, and all you have to do is just green light this team in this location? Sure, why not? So we'll see what happens. And again, I am not necessarily a proponent of going to 36, but one thing that was mentioned by Bob McKenzie a long time back when he was on TSN was that the NHL wanted to do a 40-team league. That was their ultimate goal. and that 8 of those teams they thought would be great in Europe. Well, Europe's not going to work now. There's just logistically it doesn't work. So we still may end up with expansion. And keeping in mind, too, that Major League Baseball is looking at expansion. The NBA has been talking about expansion, and their fee is going to be ridiculous. And it's only a matter of time before the NFL finally puts a team in London, England. I think that's where things are going to end up with that, too. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And again, I understand there's a lot of people who don't want to see expansion happen. But the comments from Bettman here clearly make it that it's not happening now, but he's having meetings with cities, with people for who would be potential owners. Why would you do that if you're not going to expand? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.